Have you ever trusted money more than people? Have you ever believed that power, influence, and security could protect you from anything the world might throw at you, only to discover that when the moment comes, none of it matters? For many of us, loyalty is something we talk about, something we expect, but rarely something we truly test. And yet, there are moments in life when loyalty stops being a word and becomes a choice made in seconds, a choice that can cost a life. There has always been a quiet insult lingering beneath global conversations about Filipinos, not shouted, not openly declared, but whispered. That they are only helpers, that they follow orders but never lead, that they are replaceable, that their kindness is weakness. People say it softly, as if the entire world has already agreed, as if questioning it would be naive. Even in elite circles, among billionaires and politicians, that belief quietly persists. What makes it more painful is that many assume this view is shared everywhere, as if strength can only come from wealth, as if courage must speak with an accent of power, as if loyalty has a price tag. You hear it in private conversations, in guarded remarks. Sometimes even respected voices repeat it, not realizing how deeply it cuts. And then one night, in a place far from Manila, far from any Filipino neighborhood, that belief was shattered in a way no one expected. The man at the center of this story was a Russian billionaire, a name known in boardrooms and government halls, a man who had built his empire through sharp instincts and calculated risks. He was not known for sentiment. He trusted numbers, contracts, and security teams trained by the best money could buy. For him, people were assets, useful, replaceable, temporary. Among those assets was a Filipino bodyguard, quiet, observant, always a step behind. He spoke when spoken to, listened more than he talked, and carried himself with a calm that often went unnoticed. To the billionaire, he was simply efficient, reliable, nothing more. There was no deep conversation, no personal bond, just a contract and a uniform. That night began like many others, a private meeting, a secure location, multiple layers of protection, everything planned down to the minute. And yet danger has a way of slipping through the smallest cracks. No one knows exactly how it started. Some say it was an ambush, others say it was a betrayal from within. What is known is that within moments, chaos erupted. Shouts, footsteps, a sudden realization that the systems meant to protect had failed. In those seconds, the billionaire did what most powerful men do when confronted with real fear. He froze. And that is when the Filipino bodyguard moved. There was no hesitation, no calculation, no glance back to see if escape was possible. He placed himself directly between the threat and the man he was assigned to protect. Not because cameras were watching, not because of reputation, not because of money, because of duty, because of something deeper. Witnesses later said the bodyguard took the first blow without a sound, that he continued to shield the billionaire even after being injured, that when others ran, he stood, that when survival instincts screamed to flee, he stayed. In that moment, the billionaire was no longer a powerful man. He was just another human being staring at death, and the person standing between him and that fate was someone the world had taught him to overlook. As the danger passed and silence returned, something inside the billionaire broke. Not his body, but his certainty. The belief that loyalty could be bought. The belief that strength only belonged to those at the top. The belief that Filipinos were simply background figures in other people's stories. Lying there, shaken and alive, he realized a truth that would haunt him long after the wounds healed. The man who saved his life was the one he had never truly seen. And the question that lingered in his mind was not about security failures or money lost. It was much more uncomfortable. Why would someone risk everything for a man who barely knew his name? The billionaire would later say that in those first quiet minutes after the danger had passed, his mind refused to rest. He kept replaying the same image. A man standing firm while others scattered. A man bleeding, yet unmoving. And the more he thought about it, the more unsettling the question became. Who was this man really? What kind of life produces that kind of loyalty? The Filipino bodyguard had never spoken much about himself. But his story, like many from the Philippines, did not begin with privilege or choice. It began with necessity. He grew up in a small provincial town where mornings started early and dreams learned to stay quiet. His father worked whenever work was available. His mother prayed every night, not for wealth, but for safety. Like many Filipino families, faith was not an accessory. It was survival. As a young man, he learned quickly that effort did not always equal reward. Jobs came and went. Wages were thin. He watched neighbors leave for foreign lands, carrying hope in their suitcases and fear in their hearts. Some never returned. Some came back, changed. He told himself he would endure. That providing for his family was not a burden, but a responsibility given by God. When he joined the security profession, it was not because he dreamed of power. It was because it offered stability. Training was tough. Discipline stricter than anything he had known. But there was something familiar in it. Obedience, sacrifice, the quiet understanding that your role matters even if no one applauds. Eventually, opportunity took him far from home. The Middle East, Europe. Places where accents marked you as foreign and respect had to be earned twice. He saw how people looked through him, not at him. He heard jokes whispered when they thought he could not understand. He endured it all in silence, sending money home, keeping his head down, praying that his children would never have to live this way. By the time he was assigned to the Russian billionaire, loyalty was no longer something he questioned. It was a principle carved into him by hardship. You protect what you are entrusted with, not because of praise, not because of fear, but because it is right. The billionaire, on the other hand, had lived a different life. Raised in a world where trust was transactional, where alliances shifted with profit margins, he had been betrayed before. Partners, advisors, even friends. He believed loyalty was rare and always conditional. And yet, here was a man from a country often underestimated, who had just proven him wrong in the most undeniable way. As days passed, the billionaire noticed changes in himself. He began asking questions, simple ones at first. Where are you from? How long have you been doing this work? Do you have family? The bodyguard answered politely, briefly, never exaggerating his sacrifices, never dramatizing his life. One evening, the billionaire asked why he stayed when everyone else ran. The bodyguard paused. Then he said something so simple it left the room heavy with silence. Sir, I was assigned to you. If something happened, I would answer not just to you, but to God and to my family. That was the moment the billionaire felt something unfamiliar. Shame. Not because he had been saved, but because he realized how little he had valued the people who stood closest to him. In the quiet that followed, he began to understand that the loyalty he witnessed was not accidental. It was born from a culture that teaches service without resentment, faith without conditions, and courage without the need for recognition. And slowly, the Philippines stopped being just a country on a passport. It became a question in his heart. The billionaire had always believed that understanding came from observation. If he wanted to know something, he studied it from a distance, analyzed patterns, measured outcomes. But this time, distance was no longer enough. The question that followed him after that night refused to stay quiet. It echoed in moments of stillness, in the pauses between meetings, in the long flights where sleep would not come. What kind of place shapes a man like that? He began with curiosity, not intention. A casual question turned into a longer conversation. A longer conversation turned into an invitation. Months later, for the first time in his life, he boarded a plane not for profit or negotiation, but for understanding. The Philippines did not announce itself with grandeur. There were no marble halls waiting for him, no excessive ceremony. What greeted him instead was warmth, the kind that does not demand attention, the kind that simply exists. He noticed it immediately in the way people spoke to one another, in how strangers made space, in how respect flowed naturally without being enforced. He met the bodyguard's family in a modest home where laughter filled rooms that money could not enlarge. There was food on the table, prepared with care. There was prayer before the meal, spoken softly, sincerely, not for wealth, not for success, but for safety, gratitude, and forgiveness. The billionaire found himself uncomfortable, not because of lack, but because of abundance, an abundance of sincerity he had not encountered in boardrooms or private clubs. The bodyguard's mother thanked him for coming, not with flattery, but with genuine concern for his well-being. His father spoke little, but his eyes carried a quiet pride that said everything. In Manila, the billionaire visited places his bodyguard had once walked through anonymously: training grounds, churches, streets where discipline and faith intersected daily. He watched young men and women moving with purpose, not because life was easy, but because they believed their effort mattered. What struck him most was how dignity did not depend on status. Security guards greeted executives with the same respect they showed janitors. Nurses spoke gently to patients regardless of background. No one asked who he was. They asked how he was. The contrast was unsettling. In the West, he had been surrounded by efficiency, innovation, and power, yet something always felt fragile. Here, amid traffic and imperfections, there was resilience. A calm strength shaped by storms weathered together. The bodyguard never acted differently. He remained respectful, composed, almost invisible when not needed. But the billionaire began to see what he had once missed. This was not obedience. This was character. One afternoon, as rain fell steadily outside a small chapel, the billionaire watched his bodyguard light a candle. Not for himself, for others. In that quiet glow, something shifted inside the man who had once believed loyalty could be purchased. For the first time, he understood that the Philippines had not created a hero in a single moment. It had shaped one slowly, patiently, through values passed down without applause. And in that realization, the billionaire felt the walls he had built around his heart begin to soften, making space for a respect that would soon turn into something deeper. Time moved differently for the billionaire in the Philippines. Days felt slower, not because there was less to do, but because moments seemed to matter more. He found himself paying attention to things he had ignored his entire life. The way people greeted the morning, the way laughter carried through narrow streets even after a hard day, the way faith showed itself not in grand speeches, but in quiet consistency. He watched his bodyguard blend effortlessly into this world, not as a man returning home with pride, but as a son, a neighbor, a believer. In church, he bowed his head with the same seriousness he once showed in the face of danger. In conversation, he listened more than he spoke. There was no performance, no attempt to impress, just presence. One evening, after a long day, they sat outside as the air cooled and the noise of the city softened into something almost musical. Children played nearby. Someone sang softly in the distance. The billionaire felt a strange heaviness in his chest. Not pain, but something closer to release. He realized how exhausted he had been for years, not physically, but spiritually. Always guarded, always calculating, always alone. Here, people carried burdens together. They joked about hardship without denying it. They prayed not because life was perfect, but because it was not. That paradox stayed with him. Joy did not require comfort. Hope did not wait for ideal conditions. The billionaire began to ask deeper questions, not about security protocols or logistics, but about meaning. What keeps you going when nothing is guaranteed? Why do you still believe after losing so much? The answers were never dramatic. God is faithful. Family is everything. Tomorrow is another chance. These words would have sounded naive to him once. Now they felt uncomfortably true. The transformation did not arrive like a sudden revelation. It came quietly, stacking moment upon moment. A shared meal where everyone ate the same food. A neighbor refusing payment for help. A stranger offering a blessing without knowing his name. Each act stripped away another layer of cynicism. Then came the moment that stayed with him most. It was a simple prayer gathering. No cameras, no speeches, just people asking for strength, for healing, for protection for those working far from home. When the bodyguard prayed, his voice did not shake. He did not ask for reward. He asked to continue serving well. The billionaire lowered his head, overwhelmed by a truth he could no longer escape. This man had not saved him because of money, power, or obligation. He had saved him because his life was anchored to something unbreakable. Tears came without warning, not from fear, but from recognition. He had spent his life building walls, believing strength meant standing alone. And here, in a country the world often underestimates, he witnessed a different kind of power. One rooted in faith, humility, and unwavering loyalty. In that moment, he knew he had not merely survived an attack. He had been given a second chance to see humanity as it was meant to be. When the billionaire eventually returned to his world of meetings, armored vehicles, and guarded conversations, something fundamental had shifted inside him. The danger that once haunted his nights no longer felt like the most important part of his story. What stayed with him was not the memory of fear, but the memory of a man who stood firm when fear would have been reasonable. He noticed it immediately. He listened more. He spoke less. He began looking people in the eye, not as assets, but as lives with stories he did not yet understand. And every time someone mentioned loyalty in passing, his thoughts returned to that quiet Filipino bodyguard whose courage had never asked to be seen. The relationship between them changed, though neither man made a ceremony of it. The billionaire no longer walked ahead without looking back. Decisions were discussed, not commanded. Respect replaced distance, and though wealth still surrounded him, it no longer defined him. Privately, he admitted something he had never said aloud before. The Philippines did not just save his life. It restored something he thought he had lost forever: his belief in people. He began supporting Filipino veterans, workers, and families, not out of charity, but out of gratitude. Not because it looked good, but because it felt right. When asked why, he never gave a dramatic answer. He simply said that when the world showed him its true face, a Filipino stood between him and death. That single act of loyalty became larger than both of them. It became a message in a time when trust feels fragile and humanity often feels divided. In a world driven by power, speed, and self-interest, this story stands quietly and asks a different question. What if true strength is not loud? What if real courage does not demand recognition? The Filipino bodyguard never called himself a hero. He returned to work with the same discipline, the same humility. To him, nothing extraordinary had happened. He did what he was taught. He honored his duty. He trusted his faith. And perhaps that is the most powerful truth of all. The Philippines has always been full of people like him. Men and women shaped by hardship, guided by faith, and grounded in family. People who endure storms with prayer on their lips and hope in their hearts. People who serve not because they are seen, but because it is who they are. This story is not about a billionaire. It is about a nation whose greatest strength has never been measured in wealth or weapons, but in character, in loyalty that does not waver, in kindness that does not calculate, in resilience that refuses to break. So when the world underestimates the Philippines, when it overlooks the quiet ones standing at the edges, remember this story. Remember that when everything failed, when power meant nothing, it was a Filipino who stood tall. And sometimes, that is all it takes to remind the world where true greatness lives.